I was standing in my grandmother's backyard, late April, a Sunday afternoon, the light already turning gold through the wooden fence. She was introducing me to her new neighbor, Emily Harper, a pediatrician who had just moved into the house next door. On the tea table sat a folded blue handkerchief Emily had brought as a gift. When my grandmother stepped inside for the biscuits, Emily leaned over and said quietly, "I think she planned this." I laughed, nodded. My grandmother was 81, that was her way. 3 months later, I understood the person who had arranged that afternoon was not my grandmother. My name is James Wilson. I'm 40, and I live alone in a small craftsman house on Elmwood Drive in Naperville, Illinois, about 15 minutes by car from my grandmother's place. 4 mornings a week I teach in the EMT program at the College of DuPage, and on weekends I still pull paramedic shifts for Station 32. I have been divorced for 8 years. No children. Most of my life fits inside a handful of small rituals: a run along the DuPage River at first light, secondhand books by the reading chair, woodworking in the garage. Every few months I sell a pair of walnut stools to a shop downtown. It is a quiet life. Not painful, not glamorous, just quiet. I have learned how to live small, how to close a door at 9 at night, wash the same coffee mug, and not feel like something is missing. That is the version of me you need to know before I tell you the rest. My grandmother, Margaret Wilson, is 81. She taught 3rd grade at Beebe Elementary in Naperville for over 30 years, and she retired in 2010. My grandfather died in 2019, and she has lived alone since, with a 7-year-old golden retriever named Buddy for company. Every Sunday I drive over for lunch. I mow the yard, fix whatever needs fixing, and stay for tea in the afternoon. That afternoon is the anchor of my week. Without it, the days would blur into each other. The Whitfield house next door had been empty for almost a year before someone finally moved in. That happened in January. My grandmother mentioned it to me one Sunday. A pediatrician, she said, moved down from Milwaukee. Her name is Emily. Her mother, Catherine Harper, taught with me at Beebe for 2 years, the last 2 years of the 70s. I barely remember her, but I remember the name. The girl brought me chicken soup the first week. She said all of that with a look on her face I could not quite read. I thought she was moved by the coincidence. I found out later she had a plan. Emily had the stillness of someone who had spent years learning to keep her hands steady in an emergency room. Her shoulders sat low. Her hands folded in front of her when she listened. Her eyes were direct without pushing. Her voice was low, slow, with a clinical calmness underneath the warmth. From the first minute, she was the calmest person on that porch. At that first tea, she asked me 3 questions that were more specific than small talk usually is. What year did you start as a paramedic? Which station were you assigned to in Chicago before you moved out here? Do you remember the pile-up on I-88, that first storm in the winter of 2016? I answered the first 2 easily. The 3rd one made me lift my head for a second, then I let it go. Her gift for my grandmother was a blue linen handkerchief, folded into a neat square, tied with pale twine. I saw it at Cliffhaven, over on Jefferson Street, Emily said. The color reminded me of your carnations. My grandmother opened it, a plain white thread edge, no initials. I did not think anything of it. I had one that looked almost exactly like it, embroidered with the letters J and W, that my grandmother had given me back in 2007. I had lost it years ago. Sitting on that porch, nothing in my head connected. When my grandmother went into the kitchen for the biscuits, Emily leaned toward me and said quietly, "I think she planned this." I laughed. Grandma was 81. That was exactly the kind of thing she would do. I did not question it. That, I understand now, was the one thing Emily needed from me that afternoon, my unquestioning trust. Naperville is full of shops that sell linen handkerchiefs. I poured my grandmother another cup of tea, smiled at Buddy, who had rested his chin on Emily's knee and did not think about any of it again. The porch smelled of peach tea and warm boards. Wind chimes moved overhead. Bees circled the roses beside the steps. I drove home to Elmwood that night with the windows down, April air cool on my arm. I smiled once, thinking of Emily's line. My grandmother was 81, and she liked reading between the lines of people. What I did not know was that Emily read them too. 6 weeks passed between that first tea in the afternoon. Everything shifted underneath me. May turned into June. Emily and I kept running into each other in ways that seemed casual at the time and were not. My morning run followed the DuPage River Trail. Hers, it turned out, followed the same route, starting the Sunday after our second tea. We nodded politely the first time. By the third or fourth morning, we were walking a stretch together toward the hillside footbridge, catching our breath. She never asked much. She let me talk. That, I realize now, was a skill. She asked me to hold the aluminum ladder while she painted the section of fence facing my grandmother's yard. I stood there for 40 minutes, one hand on each rail, while Buddy stretched out on the grass beside my boots and huffed his slow breaths at the bees. She borrowed my hand saw one Saturday to trim a low apple branch and returned it with a tray of scones covered in cloth. At the Nichols Library one Tuesday evening, I turned a corner and found her sitting in one of the reading chairs with an old paperback of Bridge to Terabithia open on her lap. "I reread this every year," she said, without looking up. "My father gave it to me the year I turned 15. She said it the way you'd read a line from a poem you had memorized. She told me about her father one afternoon in my grandmother's kitchen. It was late in June, warm enough that the back door stayed open, and my grandmother was slicing a plum cake at the counter. Emily was leaning against the sink with a cup of coffee, and she said without any warning, 'My father died in a pileup on I-88 near Aurora, the winter of 2016. That was all she said. She stopped there, on that sentence, and let the room hold it. My grandmother's eyes flicked over to me quick, then away. I understood, later, that she had already begun to suspect. My heart slowed by one beat. I had worked that stretch, I had run that call, but there had been dozens of calls that winter, whole nights that blurred into one long stretch of siren and salt spray and headlights on ice. I could not be sure, not right then, not standing in a kitchen with plum cake in the air. I only said, "I'm so sorry." She nodded, sipped her coffee, and moved us into another conversation. Then, on a Tuesday night in late June, my grandmother called me. Her voice was thin and short of breath, and my hands went cold before she finished the sentence. I ran to my truck and drove faster than I should have. When I pulled up, Emily was already inside. She had gotten there in the 2 minutes it took Buddy to bark at her doorbell. She had given my grandmother an aspirin, was measuring her pulse, and had called 911. When I stepped into the kitchen, she spoke to me in the calm, stripped-down way she must have used 1,000 times in her own clinic. Pulse 62, blood pressure 90/62, onset roughly 8 minutes ago, no radiating pain in the jaw or left arm. I nodded, moved into the rhythm she was setting, and we got my grandmother to the ambulance together. It turned out to be a mild spasm, not a heart attack. 3 days later she was home, sitting in her sunroom with Buddy across her lap, watching the birds at the feeder. But that night, in the waiting room at Edward Hospital, I sat next to Emily on a row of plastic chairs, with 2 bottles of Aquafina balanced on my knees. My hands were still slightly shaking. I told her thank you, not the polite thank you people say when someone holds a door open. The real kind, the kind that sits in your throat for a while first. She looked at the water bottle in her hand for a long moment, then she said, "You would have done the same for anyone." I kept that sentence. I have kept it since. Something began to shift after that night. I started to listen for her footsteps on my grandmother's porch every Sunday. I started to think about her when I turned off my kitchen light at 9 at night, walking through my quiet house toward my bedroom. I did not tell her. I had been divorced for 8 years, and I did not trust myself to know how to start something again. I had built a small, careful life on the assumption that starting again was not the shape of my next chapter. Whatever this was, I let it stay quiet. Emily kept the right distance too. She did not ask about my ex-wife. She did not ask why I lived alone in a craftsman house designed for a family of 4. She let me tell her things at my own pace. I understand now that it was the patience of someone who had waited a very long time already, and knew that another few weeks would not undo her. I did not understand it then. The Saturday afternoon that changed everything was early July. My grandmother had gone into the kitchen to pull scones out of the oven. It was just the 2 of us on the porch. Emily reached into her handbag and set something on the wicker table between us. It was a blue linen handkerchief, not the one she had given my grandmother in April. This one was older, its edges soft from years of folding. The thread on the corners faded to something between gray and green, and in one corner, stitched by hand, were 2 letters, JW. She did not look at me. She looked at the handkerchief. My father died on I-88 in November of 2016, she said. There was a paramedic who stayed with him until the end. He handed me this in the waiting room, gave me a message from my dad, and left before I could ask his name. I have had this handkerchief for 8 years. All I have ever had of him is these 2 letters. JW. I did not speak. I could not. I was seeing that night again the arc lights on the shoulder of the highway. The smell of hot metal and cold air. Robert Harper's hand slipping in mine. The words he had asked me to carry. I remembered the shape of the young woman in the waiting room, but not her face. She had been so much younger than the woman sitting across from me now, and swollen from crying, and I had not held on to any specific line of her features. All I had held on to was the sentence I had used. He was not afraid. He wanted you to know. Emily looked at me. She did not ask a question. She just looked. She was giving me a door. If I chose silence, she would honor it. I drew a breath. I opened my mouth, and right then my grandmother came back through the screen with the scones and a fresh pot of tea, and the moment slipped past me. I let it slip. I do not know why. Maybe because 8 years is too long a silence to answer between one bite of scone and the next, on a Sunday, in front of my grandmother, on a porch that smelled of lavender and warm sugar. Maybe because I needed to sit with it privately first. The corner of the handkerchief was worn where a thumb had rubbed it 1,000 times. There was a faint smell of lavender in the fabric. She had kept it in a wooden box with a lavender sachet. I would learn later. The ice in her tea shifted with a small dry click. Under the wicker chair, Buddy let out a long, patient sigh, the way he did whenever we made him wait for something. That night, in my garage, I opened my filing cabinet and pulled out the paperwork from that November in 2016. It was their patient's name, incident code, the notes I had written by hand in my own careful block letters. I sat on the cold concrete floor and read what I had written 8 years ago. I understood that in the morning, I would have to tell her everything. But the morning never came alone. Before the morning came, someone else showed up first. Vanessa Kellner came back on the last Sunday in July. Without warning, her car pulled into my grandmother's driveway at an angle, half up on the grass, the way she used to park in our old apartment complex in Chicago when she was in a hurry to prove something. She rang the bell. My grandmother opened the door. Vanessa smiled with her clean, even teeth. I heard James comes here on Sundays. I was just passing through Naperville. My grandmother did not invite her in. She stood in the doorway, blocking the view of me on the couch behind her. Her voice was polite and cold at once. Passing through from Chicago would put you off your route by half an hour. Is there something you needed? Vanessa stepped in half a foot and greeted me across the room. James, you look well. Her eyes swept the coffee table, a pediatrics journal Emily had left there, a small pair of running shoes on the porch mat. She understood in 1 second. Her smile widened. I stood up. I was not angry. I had stopped being angry with Vanessa a long time before. But I saw the way her eyes had catalogued the traces of Emily in that room, and I knew she was about to try something. She asked about my father. He had died in 2023, and he had left me a small amount, most of which I had spent on Grandma's home care. Vanessa had heard something about it and was already building a bigger number in her head. Are you still using Baumgartner for your legal work? She asked, as if the answer did not matter. Baumgartner had been our lawyer during the divorce. My grandmother cut in before I could answer. James does not owe you a single answer. The divorce settled the property. You need to go. Vanessa smiled and nodded and turned to leave. In the doorway, she looked back over her shoulder at me. James, you still keep that filing cabinet full of paramedic reports, don't you? That one from 2016. You never could throw it out. Then she walked to her car. The last line was a small knife, placed carefully. She had seen that cabinet when she still lived with me. She had not understood what was inside. She had only remembered that it mattered to me deeply, and she had held that small detail for 8 years. The next Saturday, at the Naperville Farmers Market on Jackson Avenue, Vanessa found Emily by the peaches. I put that scene together later, from what both of them told me. Vanessa just happened to be at the same stand at the same time. She introduced herself. Oh, sorry. I'm Vanessa. I used to be James Wilson's wife. You're the neighbor of his grandmother, right? I've heard. Emily was polite. She nodded once. She let Vanessa keep talking. And Vanessa spoke in the softest tone, the one you use when you are pretending to be a friend giving a warning. I do not want to interfere. Just if you are starting to feel something for him, I want you to know before it costs you. James is not a man who stays. He goes silent for months. He retreats into himself. He keeps a filing cabinet full of paperwork from 10 years ago, and he lives inside that cabinet more than he lives with anyone in the room. Ask him about the I-88 report from 2016. He will know exactly what you mean. Every sentence was built out of something real. Vanessa really had lived with me. She really had seen the cabinet. Only the meaning was wrong. She used the truth to build a lie. It was the sharpest thing she had ever done. Emily did not say much back. She thanked Vanessa for her concern, paid for her peaches, and walked to her car. But she was quiet the rest of the night. She did not call me. She did not come by. That Sunday, when I arrived at my grandmother's house for tea, Emily was not there. Grandma noticed the empty chair before I did. She turned to me over the rim of her teacup and said, "Did you do something to upset her?" I told her I did not know what. She sighed, a small sigh she had used my whole life when someone had failed her. Then someone else did. That night, my grandmother walked across the strip of grass between the two houses and knocked on Emily's door. Emily let her in. Grandma took a seat at the kitchen island and asked her directly, "Did anyone come to see you this week?" Emily nodded. My grandmother did not hesitate. That would be the Kellner girl. She has no business in Naperville. She heard James was promoted to full instructor and that his father left him a little something, and she came to try her luck one last time. Don't let her take from you the thing you came here to find. That last sentence made Emily lift her head. The thing you came here to find. My grandmother knew. She had known for a while. "You know who I am?" Emily said. My grandmother smiled a smile that had been saving itself for a long time. "I know a young woman who wrote me a very nice letter that mentioned she was Catherine Harper's daughter. Your mother did teach with me at Beebe in 78 and 79, and I do remember her. But I also know a young woman who searched the Illinois medical directory for a paramedic named James. I have watched how you asked about him, sideways, for 3 months. You do not need to be a doctor to piece that together. I just waited for you and James to catch up to me at your own pace." Emily's mouth opened. She closed it. Then she said, "The tea in April. Did you arrange that?" My grandmother's smile softened. "I thought I arranged it. I did not realize you had arranged it 4 months before I did. Both of us were arranging. He did not know either of us was doing anything. Does James know?" "He is beginning to know about the handkerchief. He has not found his voice yet. Go and tell him. All of it. Including the sentence you said to him at the tea." Emily's face changed. "You heard me? I was walking to the kitchen. The screen door is not far. I'm 81, not deaf. You said, I think she planned this. You wanted him to hear it as me matchmaking, so he would not look too hard at you. I noticed. I let it be." Emily was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, so softly that my grandmother had to lean in, "I did not come here to force him to remember me. I came to find out if he was still the man who stayed with my father. Now I know." That was Sunday night. The farmer's market smelled of ripe peaches and paper bags. The summer streetlights had come on above the hedges. Cicadas were rasping outside my grandmother's porch, and in my garage, the metal filing cabinet stood cold under one bare bulb. On Tuesday night, I was reading the last chapters of East of Eden on my own front porch. A light moved across the yard between our houses. It was Emily, walking through the grass, a folded blue square in her hand. She stopped at the bottom step. "Can I come in?" I stood up. She followed me into the kitchen. She placed the handkerchief on the wooden table between us. She did not sit down. She used the voice I imagined she used at her pediatric clinic, steady, clear, with no room for evasion. "This was yours, was it not?" I pulled out a chair. I sat. I did not invite her to sit yet. I needed a second. Then I said, "Yes." I told her everything. November 15th, 2016. The first bad snow of the season. A 6-vehicle pileup on I-88, westbound, just past the Farnsworth Road exit. I had been the paramedic assigned to the second car. A silver Camry crushed in on the driver's side. Robert Harper, her father, was still pinned. Chest trauma, internal bleeding. I knew from 30 seconds in that he was not going to make it. So I stayed. I held his hand. He was awake for the last 7 minutes. He said her name. Emily. He said, "Tell my girl I was not afraid." I nodded. He died in my hand at 7:42 that night. At Rush Copley, in the family waiting room, she had been sitting at the end of the row of chairs. Nobody told me it was her. All I saw was a young woman with a red, swollen face and hands that would not stop shaking. A nurse pointed. I walked over. Her father's belongings were already in an evidence bag. All I had was the handkerchief in my jacket pocket, the one my grandmother had stitched for me in 2007. I gave it to her. I delivered the message. I did not give her my name because I thought my name was not the point. I thought she would want to forget everything about that night. I was wrong. She wanted to remember. She has remembered for 8 years. Emily sat down at last. She cried, but not loudly, and not the shaking kind. Just quiet water running down her face. "I thought I had invented you," she said. "For 8 years." Then she told me the rest. Her mother had died in September of last year. When Emily cleaned out her mother's house, she found her father's small notebook. There was an entry from the summer of 2015. It said, "If anything ever happens to me, thank the man named James, who sat with me at the hospital last year while I was waiting for the appendectomy. He did not have to." Her father and I had met once before that November highway. I had not remembered him. I had come off a paramedic shift at Rush Copley late one night, noticed a middle-aged man sitting alone by the surgical intake, and I had sat down beside him for the 20 minutes before they took him in. That was all. He had remembered my name for the rest of his life. Emily had a name. She searched. She found me in Naperville. She traced my grandmother through the county records, and when she saw Margaret Wilson's name, she recognized it. Her own mother had taught with a Margaret Wilson at Beebe, briefly, in the late 70s. She wrote a careful letter. She bought the Whitfield house. She said, "I did not come to make you love me. I came to see if you were still the man who stayed with my dad. If you were, I would stay. If you were not, I would go back to Milwaukee." That was the whole plan. I asked her, "And what about that sentence at the tea? I think she planned this?" She looked at me straight. "Your grandmother did plan it. She really did. But I planned it 4 months before she did. I let you hear my sentence as being about her, so that you would not look too closely at me that afternoon. I needed you not to suspect anything for one day. That was the only wrong thing I did. I let you misunderstand one sentence." I asked her, "What did Vanessa say to you?" She told me all of it. She did not leave anything out. Then she said, "She used the truth to lie. Your grandmother had already given me enough of the truth to know the difference." I pushed the handkerchief across the table toward her. "Keep it. It always belonged to you from your father, through me." She shook her head and pushed it back to the middle. "We keep it together." We agreed to move slowly. No rush, no announcement. She would not go back to Milwaukee. I would not pretend the last 8 years had not happened. We would start from there. We did not kiss. We did not hold each other. She stood up, walked out to the porch, and looked across the grass toward my grandmother's house. I stood next to her, half a meter apart. Grandma's porch light was still on. She was pretending to read by the front window. Both of us knew. Before Emily left, she said the sentence I keep coming back to. "You know the funniest thing? My father told me he was not afraid. For 8 years I thought he had said that to spare me. Now I believe him. Because if the man sitting with him was you, then he was not afraid. It was the truth." The lamp above my dining table was warm and yellow. The cutting board still smelled of lemon from that morning. Crickets were tuning up outside the window. The blue handkerchief lay between us on the wooden table like a border that had already dissolved. I walked her to the top of my porch steps. She crossed the strip of grass to her house, my grandmother's house, 30 steps, easy in the summer dark. I stood there watching until her bedroom light came on. Then I went inside, turned off my kitchen light, and left the handkerchief on the table. I wanted it there. September, October, November of 2025. We moved one step at a time. Lunch in the College of DuPage cafeteria between my classes, Saturday afternoons at Cantingy Gardens, where she read and I sketched. I taught her my grandmother's biscuit recipe, cold butter, no kneading, fold 3 times. She ruined the first 2 batches and laughed louder than I had ever heard her laugh. My grandmother took the credit. Every Sunday she squinted at me over her teacup and said, "I told you so. I saw it coming. I let her have it. She had earned it." She did not mention the other conversation, the one about who had actually planned the tea in April. That stayed between her and Emily. I found out only afterward from Emily, and I have never repeated it to anyone else who knew Grandma. It was theirs to hold. Vanessa tried one more time. In late October, a letter arrived from her lawyer's office in Chicago. It asked, on carefully polite letterhead, that the terms of our property settlement be reconsidered in light of newly disclosed inheritance. My lawyer, Ted Kavanaugh, wrote a one-page response. He explained that the 2017 decree had closed the matter. There was no legal ground for reopening. Vanessa did not answer. That was the last I ever heard of her name. It felt neither like victory nor like closure. It felt like a door quietly finishing the last inch of its swing. In November, there was one small crisis. Emily was offered the head of pediatrics job at Children's Wisconsin, the position she had wanted 5 years earlier, back when she was still building the arc of her career. The salary was almost double what she made in Naperville. The house would be 2 hours away. She sat with the offer for 10 days. She did not tell me she was considering it. She did not want me weighing in. She did not want to know what would happen if I asked her to stay. On the 10th night, she came over. She sat down at my kitchen table, which had, without either of us naming it, become her chair too. She said, "I turned it down. I'm staying, not because of you." I looked at both places, and I could see myself more clearly here than there. "That's why," I nodded. I respected that not because of you more than any romantic sentence she could have said. It was why I trusted her decision. We went into winter together. New Year's Eve was at my grandmother's, the three of us and Buddy. She had her feet on a footstool, a shawl around her shoulders, and she told the story of stitching that handkerchief in 2007. She had known, she said, that I would end up giving it to some girl one day. I predicted this 40 years in advance, she said, and her eyes were bright. I only got the direction of the handing wrong. In March of 2026, my grandmother's health began to fail, not suddenly, in slow, deliberate steps, the way she had always done everything. Emily and I split the nights. Emily took Tuesdays and Thursdays. I took Mondays, Wednesdays, Fridays. Weekends we were both there. Buddy slept at the foot of her bed. She died on a morning in April, quietly, with my hand in one of hers and Emily sitting at the foot of the bed. The last thing she said, low and clear, was, "I waited until I was sure." She left her house to Emily in her will. On a slip of paper folded inside the folder, in her small, careful hand, was a note. "Because you stayed." There are winter nights I woke up and saw the light on in her living room, Emily, reading after a late shift, one leg tucked under her, the tea gone cold. I made 2 mugs of peach tea. I brought them over. We did not say much. That was how we loved each other, through small things that did not need saying. By October of 2026, the maple trees along the DuPage River Trail were red. I proposed to her on the stretch of path where our morning runs had first overlapped. I did not kneel. I did not bring flowers. I stopped in the middle of the trail. I opened a small navy velvet box the same color as the handkerchief. I said, "I'm not good with words, but I'm good at staying. Will you marry me?" She laughed. She said, "I have been answering that question for 8 years. We got married in the spring of 2027. In her backyard, our backyard now, 30 guests, the priest from Saints Peter and Paul, folding chairs on the same grass where the 2 houses had once been separated by a strip. Buddy, 9 years old, gray around his eyes, now carried our 2 rings tied to the blue JW handkerchief along the aisle of grass. There were folded flowered cloths on the table beneath the arbor. The light came in gold through the wooden fence, exactly the light of the April afternoon when my grandmother had introduced us. It was not a big feeling day. There was no dramatic weeping, no large speeches, just the feeling of something arriving at the place it had always been trying to reach. I keep coming back to something small. Weekend mornings smelled of butter biscuits in the oven. In January, a thin layer of snow covered the front yard, and Buddy left small, careful prints across it. I could hear his nails on the wood floor before I heard anything else on Sunday mornings. I made French press coffee. I finished 2 walnut stools in the garage, a matched pair, one for me, one for her. The night after the wedding, we sat on the back porch, the porch that had been my grandmother's, that was ours now. Buddy stretched between us. The blue JW handkerchief was folded and resting on the arm of her chair. I turned to her and said, "That sentence you said at the first tee, I think she planned this. You knew I would take it as grandma matchmaking, did you not?" She smiled, the smile she had kept for 8 years plus 2 more. "I needed you to take it that way. If you had looked closely at me for even 1 minute that afternoon, you might have guessed I was there for you. I was not ready for you to guess that early." I was quiet. Then I said, "I did look at you. I just did not know I was looking." She put her hand on top of mine. Buddy sighed. The inside of the house was dark, all its lights off, and I could feel my grandmother smiling from somewhere I could not name. It is the summer of 2027 now. Another slow afternoon. I am 42. Emily is 38. The blue JW handkerchief is framed in the hallway, hung beside a photograph of Robert Harper, her father, which she let me put up on the wall of our house. Here is what I learned in these last 8 years. The loudest people who came through my life, Vanessa, and people like her came to take, and they always spoke in a loud enough voice that I heard every word. The people who came to stay, my grandmother, Emily, came in footsteps I never quite caught. They brought tea. They brought handkerchiefs. They waited for me to notice. Sometimes a person comes into your life because of one small act of kindness you have already forgotten. Sometimes they come twice, once through a stranger's hand on a snowy highway, once through an old woman's Sunday tea. Both times, they were standing very close. You only needed to look a little more carefully. The loudest voice in the room is not always the person nearest you. The person who is nearest sometimes only smiles, says one ordinary sentence, and waits for you to notice them on your own. Don't let the noise of the person about to leave drown out the voice of the person who is choosing to stay. I want to ask you 2 things. Have you ever met someone who remembered a kindness you had already forgotten? And is someone standing very close to you right now, someone you have not yet realized is here for you? If this story reached you, hit like. Subscribe if you want another one next week about the people who stay, the people who come back, and the small acts of kindness that travel further than we think. In the comments, tell me who the Emily in your life is, the one quietly waiting for you to notice. I read everyone. See you next story.